It's game day in New Zealand's capital. Bledisloe 2 is only a few hours away from kickoff. Perfect time to do a final breakdown of both teams from either side of the Tasman and determine which players are in the hot seat today. Let's get to it. So if we take a look at the All Blacks team, fairly predictable overall, not a lot to write home about, which is why I didn't do a whole video just on the NZ team. But of course, one name jumped out, and that was Beauden Barrett. He is slotting into 10, pushing Damian McKenzie to the bench. Now, it's not as nefarious as it may seem. It's not that D-Mac has been dropped on form. It's not that that flick pass he did out the back in Sydney has cost him dearly. No, Razor wanted to do this for a long time. In fact, I'm sure if Beauden Barrett didn't get sick last week, he probably would have spent 30 minutes at number 10 in the second half. So why am I saying that Beauden Barrett's in the hot seat? This guy has 2 Rugby World Player of the Year awards back-to-back. He's got 131 test caps to his name. What is there left to prove? Well, he's got to prove that he can still run the cutter at 10. You got to remember, it was November 2022 that he last suited up as a first 5 for the men in black. Also, let's not put on rose-colored glasses. Beauden was in a head-to-head duel with Richie Mo'unga to be the #1 pivot in New Zealand. And decisively, Richie Mo'unga won that competition in Johannesburg in 2022. He never looked back after a star performance against the Springboks, saving the job of Ian Foster along the way. So Barrett actually lost his preferred position on form. He's got to prove he can do it again this weekend. And we also want to see that this lineup can work against the Northern Hemisphere teams. Is Beauden going to go to fullback later in the game? Is that going to push Jordan? Is Damian McKenzie going to come on at 10? There are a lot of different ways this could go. What we need to see is that D-Mac can still make an impact off the bench, but do it with control, not be flaky, not invite danger into the game, particularly if it's tight. So I actually think this is a pretty compelling change here. And if Beauden can deliver from minute 1 and D-Mac can bring the goods off the bench, you might see a lot more of that combination on the Northern Hemisphere tour. Now, a player who definitely has a lot to prove is David Havili. He is certainly a maligned player. I've looked at a lot of your comments on this channel. Here's the thing with Havili. I often think about ceilings and floors when it comes to players. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that the ceiling is the best they can play. What does a blinder look like? Conversely, what is their floor? If they're having a shocker, how low is the floor? Let's just pick a couple of the greats from New Zealand rugby. Kieran Reid, Richie McCaw. Obviously, the ceiling is way up there in the firmament, but their floor was pretty damn high. Richie on a bad day was kind of awesome. You know what I'm saying? So here's the thing with Havili. Very high ceiling. We've seen him swing games with his tactical kicking and his distribution. I think of his game against South Africa in 2022 in Johannesburg. Absolutely a man of the match performance. But his floor, it's low. When I think of his floor, I think of him against Ireland, also in 2022, that home series in New Zealand. I'm thinking about game 3, and I'm just having flashbacks to him repeatedly clattering into the Irish defense and getting totally swallowed up. Now look, there were team-wide failures in the All Blacks at that point, but what we did learn about Havili is that he doesn't have the physicality to make a difference. He's a tactical player, he's a distributing player, he's a player who's quick on his feet. These are attributes that I recognize and respect. But the All Blacks have struck gold with Geordie Barrett at 12. Billy Proctor's coming in. There's always the highly experienced ALB there. He's a stalwart. And if next year yields some more midfield talent, there's going to be a squeeze there. So will there be room for Havili looking ahead to 2027? Well, in this game, he needs to underline what his point of difference is. We know he can't match the physicality of Geordie. What can he do? I think this is a golden opportunity for him to come into the game, particularly if it's tight, and implement a kicking game that could help the All Blacks play down the right end of the field. He's got the skill set to do it. I want to see that in Wellington. I want to see Havili step up and deliver. And lastly, we have Luke Jacobson. He's a tackling machine for the Chiefs, always outstanding at Super Rugby level. But that loose forward mix is becoming crowded. Ethan Blackadder isn't quite right this week. You got to think he's going to come back into that match day squad on the Northern Hemisphere tour. There's the specter of Shannon Frizzell over in Japan. He's lurking. He's going to come back next year. Wallace Satiti has come on strong. Hell, if Satutu plays really well next year, maybe Razor will bring him back into the All Blacks fold. The point is, it's getting kind of crowded in the loose forward mix, even with the imminent retirement of Sam Cane. So Jacobson doesn't want to become a forgotten man. And he's been decent at All Black level. He's certainly shown his defensive wares, but he needs to make a statement performance in the second half when he comes on. He needs to continue his accuracy and perhaps show just a little bit more as a link man and with ball in hand. If he can turn in an energized, powerful performance, maybe he can lock in his spot in the All Blacks 23 going forward. Let's switch gears and look at the Australians. Here is their team. Feast your eyes on that. Pretty good team. Obviously, the biggest talking point was Nick White being dropped after a good performance in Sydney. There were a few errors, but he certainly showed his wily veteran instincts. Apparently, he was just so physically beaten up by that game that he wasn't quite ready to go again. So we got Jake Gordon coming in. He has shined at times for the Waratahs. Haven't necessarily seen that form translate to international level, so big game needed from the halfback. But I think it's all going to start up front with the tight five. So I'm going to say all 5 of those players are in the hot seat. And it's not because they did a bad job in Sydney. Au contraire, the Wallabies scrum really surprised me. I think we could see the fingerprints of Mike Cron, the former All Blacks scrum guru, on this Wallabies side. Yeah, 1 or 2 didn't go their way, but there were times when they looked like they could dominate the All Blacks scrum. And that's a little bit scary. So let's prove that lightning can strike twice. The Wallabies tight 5, you know what? They have really been reviled in the past 10 years. Time to make a statement, time to show that they have changed. And I think that doing it in New Zealand, in a Kiwi cauldron, that's a perfect time to do it. So if the Wallabies scrum can really get parity or even dominate the All Blacks in Wellington, that is going to be a big statement for the Wallabies. And it's going to give them a lot of confidence going forward into their Northern Hemisphere tour. I mentioned Nick White being dropped, Jake Gordon coming in, but number 10 is actually what I'm looking at for Australia. Now, Noah Lolesio, very good player for the Brumbies, needs to stamp some authority on that number 10 jersey. You know, from a Kiwi perspective, we've been very critical of Damian McKenzie this year when his game management hasn't quite been at a Beauden Barrett or Dan Carter level. But I think the Wallabies certainly looked a little bit aimless with the ball in hand at times last week, and the buck does stop with the number 10. He's got all the skills to be a world-class 10. I think he needs to have an authoritative, commanding performance this week. I think it's really needed. And again, if you can do it in New Zealand, well, that makes a bigger statement than doing it in Sydney. So it's a golden opportunity for him as a young number 10. He's only 24 years old. He has developed a lot. I don't want to give him a hard time, but haven't quite seen him just grab that number 10 jersey and make it his own yet. And lastly, players in the hot seat for Australia, well, basically the entire back line defensively. They were ripped to shreds in that first quarter in Sydney. And look, I'm a big fan of guys like Callaway, Wright. These guys, for Australia, they're spectacular. They are so dangerous in space. You blink and they're gone. But the defense was in shambles at times. I think that essentially the All Blacks hoodwinked a lot of the Wallabies. They drew in a lot of players to their first ball carrier and then they popped the ball out the back, and it just created so much space at times. You know, it looked like sevens rugby out there. There was so much space as the backlines went one-on-one. And look, in a straight shootout, the All Blacks backline won that game. Yes, both sides scored 4 tries in the end, but there was so much damage done so quickly in that first 20 minutes in Sydney that you feel like, you know, if the All Blacks click again this weekend, there could just be this purple passage of play that puts the game out of the Wallabies' reach. So they really need to D up. I don't know if it's their attitude or the defensive system itself. I'm thinking it's probably more the attitude because they looked a lot better in the second half. Smart decisions, being connected. We've got to see more sure-footed defense from Australia this weekend, or they do not have a chance of winning this game. Who do I think is going to win? I actually think it could be tight again. I'm not sure that the All Blacks are going to thrash the Wallabies, as is their style. They do have a lot to play for. Sam Cane's 100th game, very well deserved. Think that will lift them. And look, honestly, I think their poor recent returns in Wellington, that's got to be a driver too. That's kind of become a hoodoo ground for them. It's kind of crazy to think that they have a better success rate at Ellis Park than Westpac Stadium recently, but that's how it is. You know, the Wellington ground is one of their worst grounds on earth, so they need to turn that around this weekend. I'm going to give it to the All Blacks, but I think it could be tight. Let me know what you guys think. Comment below, and I'll be back tomorrow to break down the game, as well as the Springbok Pumas finale. It's going to be a busy weekend, but I can't wait, and I will see you guys then. Take it easy. Bye for now.